Which leads me to the next bullet point, which is security, because the idea of clashes, recovery, a stop to the smooth flow of things. Enhance security. Now, we remain as a travel advisory from the United States, these warnings for people not to come to Kenya. And with a sort of nationalistic pride, we keep on saying, well, nasty things happen in the US as well. Nasty things have just happened in Boston at the end of a marathon. Nobody said never go to the States anymore. Why have they retained, they being these countries? Do you have any sympathy for this approach to our tourist industry?
Well, you're absolutely right, John. First of all, when you describe the boom and bust that we continually have, the booms are there because we've marketed and things have gone well, and then we have a bust because there's something has happened which has resulted in travel advisories and people staying away. The current situation with the travel advisory from America really is untenable. What we have to understand is that countries like the UK have travel advisories on every country in the world. A travel advisory is a set of advice to their citizens about the destination they're going to. They're not necessarily anything sinister there. So the UK, for example, would have a travel advisory on many, many countries.
And say don't go there because unless
not necessarily saying don't go there.
Or if you go there, take your malaria tablets.
If you're going there, take your malaria tablets.
Exactly.
So the travel advisory is advice to people going to a destination.
Right.
Now, in the case of the UK, from time to time, they would have a travel warning, which would be a warning against non-essential travel. So when they have a warning against non-essential travel, it means don't go there. So pretty well every country in the world has travel advice. We can look at that travel advice and we can argue with it, and we do. We engage with the various embassies and we engage with the foreign ministries of the countries concerned, and we try to encourage them to have slightly less draconian or negative comments about us. But in the case of a travel warning against non-essential travel,
such as the one from the US.
Such as the one from the US. Now, the US is a travel warning. It links us with places like Afghanistan, with Libya, with North Korea. They are subject to a travel warning, and there is Kenya amongst them.
Right.
This is ridiculous.
Right.
And what we would like to see the new government doing is taking strong and urgent measures to engage with the Americans and to say to them, look, this is not a country that is unstable. This is not a country that you should be warning your citizens to stay away from. All very well have some advice, but not a warning.
Right. The Kenya Wildlife Service, the KWS, introduce an air unit, body armor, wardens, introduce robot decoys by 2015 as a pilot. Poaching. So poaching is the key word, KWS and poaching.
Well, I think it's excellent, again, that the government has recognised the importance of having an effective anti-poaching unit on the ground and having an effective organisation to run our national parks. And KWS is that organisation. So it needs support and it needs strengthening.
I'm sure you're going to say nice things about the KWS, but let me hit you with the man in the streets comment, is that the direction, the leadership of the KWS, there's a certain collusion there. The poacher who gets sort of like 20,000 bob for killing an elephant isn't part of the great scheme of things where this is a trade for multimillionaires. So what do you think we ought to do?
Well, absolutely. In fact, you've taken the words out of my mouth, John, because I was starting off by saying we do need to have an effective body that runs our national parks and is involved in anti-poaching. The government is putting the emphasis on the battle against poachers, a war on poachers. But there's also a need to recognise that the people in the front line who are getting killed on both sides are Kenyans, whether they're rangers or whether the people who are going out trying to make a buck by killing wildlife. Those are the Kenyans who are dying on both sides. The people behind the illicit trade, the smugglers, the dealers, and indeed the people involved in the markets that are demanding ivory, they're not Kenyans. And I think that while I applaud the strengthening of KWS, we need to look also at taking on the illicit dealers and the illicit trade, and we need to have much better prosecution. We've got ridiculous penalties now.
Again, we've got instances that you must read the papers as well as I do. A Chinese national does something bad in our parks, 30,000 bob fine. Kenyan does something bad in China, taken to jail and imprisoned for life. So in other words, is this poor country unable to resist the great arm of Chinese, American, call it what you will, imperialism? Are we meant to really get wound up about this?
We should be getting wound up, John, and we should be standing up for ourselves. The first thing we should be doing is looking at the penalties that apply for wildlife crime. We've already been involved in suggesting to the government that there are existing laws on the statute book against economic crimes. Killing elephants, smuggling ivory, dealing in ivory, taking it out of the country is an economic crime because the ivory belongs to Kenyans. This is an important national resource that can help this country because it gives us a competitive advantage in our tourism industry. We are one of the very few countries in the world with large numbers of elephants. And if they're all wiped out, then that is a crime against Kenya's economy. So we need to see the government looking at having the Director of Public Prosecutions, having a task force to really beef up the penalties, treating it as an economic crime, bringing prosecutions, and not letting people off with derisory fines, and off they go and carry on in their illicit trade.
So we're going to go back now to my bullet points, and I'm going to draw you on the idea of promoting alternative income of communities living around game parks and wildlife reserves to ensure that they're not a threat to natural habitats.
Well, I believe very strongly that we have some fantastic attractions in this country. We were talking just now about the wildlife. I've heard many people say we should be moving away from bush and beach tourism and we should be looking for other things. You'd never get the chairman of the Swiss Tourist Board saying they should be moving away from winter sports. Our wildlife gives us a huge advantage. Kenyans can actually feel proud when they travel overseas. People recognize the fact that this country has such a huge diversity of wildlife, especially the iconic species.
Let me take you back. So I hope I don't disturb your train of thought, and do come back to it. I wanted you, sorry, that's my gap in my thinking. Remind us of the statistics of the numbers of elephants that have been in your lifetime, for example, because you said we've got lots of elephants. But tell us about how many elephants there were.
Well, this is a very good point. I mean, when I was a young kijana, I can remember we used to drive to Mombasa in my father's car, and I'd be on the back seat with my sisters, and to get us to keep quiet, my father would tell us to count the elephants and see who was the first one to get to 500. So we used to see elephants all the way down the Mombasa Road. And when I was a schoolboy, there were over 200,000 elephants in this country, 200,000. Then during the 70s and 80s, the numbers went down significantly. And during the 70s and 80s, 100,000 were killed by poachers until the ban on trade, which came in 1989. Now, and at that stage, it had gone down to 18,000. Today, we have around 30,000. If they could kill 100,000 during the last poaching wave, it's going to be very easy to kill 30,000. And that's why we need to have a ban on trade at the moment. And we need the Chinese to stop trading in ivory and stop importing illicit ivory from the countries in Africa that have elephants.
Right, so to take you back on the idea of using the wildlife environment as a source of income in itself. And this idea again also of homestay tourism, because now we're linking up lots of things in one go.
Yeah. Well, I think you're quite right, John. We should be looking to see how can Kenyans become more involved and participate more in tourism. I mean, already one has to say that very many Kenyans earn a livelihood from tourism, even if they're not employed directly, because there's a very big multiplier effect in the economy. You see this at the coast particularly. When tourism at the coast is doing badly, all the other businesses do badly, because tourism is such a major demander of services and supplies from other industries.
Should we have luxury tourism for some and sort of, I don't know, pauper tourism, if you want to call it that? Because people say that it's very easy to come here and have a whale of a time at prices that you'd never imagine anywhere else in the world. And you're a sort of 17-year-old university graduate on a gap year.
I wouldn't say that Kenya is all that cheap anymore. I think things have changed. If you look at the prices in restaurants, in international restaurants, they're fairly pricey. But I think what we do need as a mature destination is to have a range of products. If you look at those countries that are very successful at tourism, they're not just high-end or low-end. You need to have a range, but you need to have planning so that you allow, for example, budget guest houses, budget hotels. Kenyans could be involved in guest houses. In Greece, for example, there are 12 million Greeks. They have 12 million visitors. Many of the visitors are staying in guest houses owned by Greek families. But
with some sort of regulation as to the manner in which they live?
If you're going to widen the scope of tourism to bring in guest houses, and you're going to need to ensure that they're of the right standard, because we need to have our reputation as a premium tourism destination maintained. So you do what they do in other countries. Let's not be frightened of adopting things that work elsewhere. There are many countries that have guest houses, but what they do is they have them licensed by the National Tourist Office. They have them inspected and checked annually. They have star ratings, they're graded, and so you have the right standard.
Last question, and the last question is an open-ended one. New government, new president. In the best of all possible worlds, what would you prioritize of all the concerns that we've touched upon here that will lead our tourism in the right direction quickly?
Well, what tourism really needs is to be a destination that is safe and secure. So just in the same way that Kenyans need security and safety, visitors need to see that the country is safe and secure. So the government needs to put in place measures to ensure that there is effective policing, there's effective security. It needs to combine that with infrastructure where it's required to develop our industry, and it needs to recognize that people are not going to come here unless we tell them about this country, and there needs to be money put aside for marketing. Those are the things the government can do: security, infrastructure like roads, and assign money for marketing the destination. The private sector is the one then that runs the facilities, and the private sector is ready to engage with the government in a private-public partnership to make the tourism of this country work very well and to take us to new heights.
Jake Greaves-Cook, tourism stakeholder, thank you very much for being on the JSO interview.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, John.